Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Wednesday, December 17th, 2025. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll hear from Variety's Trish Deitch and Ted Keller about the making of our 120th anniversary issue. It's a blockbuster issue in print and online, and these two were the engines that corralled the stories and the staff and the research to make it all happen. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Here's another seismic jolt for Hollywood. Academy Awards are moving to YouTube in 2029. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced the deal that sent jaws dropping this morning. NBC Universal was really angling for the Oscars, so you know YouTube must have made the Academy some offer. We'll be reporting on that and bring you updates at Variety.com. This is a big one. In other big news, Warner Brothers is telling Paramount, we're just not that into you. The Warner Brothers Discovery Board has reaffirmed that it wants to merge with Netflix. It is not swayed by Paramount's offer. Paramount, meanwhile, has said it's not going higher than its existing $30 share bid. So at some point, somebody's going to blink, or Netflix is going to buy Warner Brothers and HBO. There was a lot of interesting back and forth between Paramount's David Ellison and Warner Brothers' David Zaslav in another huge SEC filing that was released first thing Wednesday morning. My colleague Todd Spangler got up early to comb through it to write the backstory that you need to read. It's on Variety.com right now. And speaking of Netflix again, the streamer continues to add to its podcast menu. It has struck a deal with Barstool Sports for video rights to 3 of Barstool's top podcasts, including Pardon My Take. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. Today we're joined by 2 stalwarts of Variety's operation, Deputy Editor Trish Deitch and Design Director Ted Keller. These 2 were the heroes of getting Variety's fabulous 120th anniversary issue to the finish line. You can find it online, where we have a nifty Variety 120 digital hub built out for all the content. The Variety 120 package was a labor of love for a large group of us, and as you'll hear in the conversation that follows, it also wouldn't have happened without the talents of Executive Editor Brent Lang and Creative Director Haley Kluge. Trish Deitch and Ted Keller, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
You two and Brent Lang, our Executive Editor, were the engines of our 120th anniversary package. We knew that this important anniversary was coming, and you two took the reins and made it happen. You two really hunkered down, looked across time, and figured out, okay, how are we going to slice 120 years into digestible components where we can do stories that illuminate eras of the entertainment business. This package is a celebration of variety, but it's really a look at the history and the eras of the business we cover, looking at Hollywood through the lens of what we covered and what mattered to us. And that's a really important distinction that gives this package even more weight. So with enormous thanks, my first question to both of you, to Trish, Ted, once we determined what we wanted to do, where did you start assembling the package that was ultimately published on December 10th?
Somewhere we decided that we were going to do it by decade. And I think it was Haley, our art director, who laid out the first decade and said, I think you can do 4 stories, 4 tiny stories, 250 words each or so by decade. So I went back to Brent Lang, who's a genius when it comes to film history and variety history. He really understands it. And we discussed what 4 stories per decade should we choose for 120 years.
This was a rare opportunity where we knew the date far out, and we also knew that we weren't going to have competitive pressures. Nobody was going to beat us to celebrating Variety's 120th anniversary. So, listeners, when I tell you it was a beautiful thing to behold because it was genuine discovery, it was intellectual curiosity, it was all good things. And I just wish we could bottle it and put it into every issue. But this one is very special. The stories are short, and some of them are big landmark moments like the launch of CNN and all news broadcasting. And some of them are much more subtle, but they're telling moments for the era in which they occur. Did either of you have moments where you learned things that you were just so fascinated by? Was this an educational process for both of you?
It very much was for me. And some of the discussions early on were particularly when Variety was not in Hollywood was how do we handle those first few decades where it's vaudeville and what are we going to use to visualize that? And it was a big discussion and it just happened as I was kind of digging through. I'm a moderate Marx Brothers fan, but I remember that they were like a kid singing act at some point and I couldn't remember the name. And finally I conjured it up in my head and we were able to find a 1905 picture of a version of the Marx Brothers as children. And that was a thing that said, okay, we can find a way to tell these stories visually. It just may not be the obvious way we think.
Trish, tell us a little bit more about the spirit of telling these stories in such short bites and the challenge of that. Having written a couple of the entries, I do know Mark Twain was right. It's harder to write short.
We did base the tone of this on the back pages, which people won't see unless they get the print magazine because it's not online. And they're very beautifully written and they're deep and they're contextual and they're a little bit poetic. They tell stories that most people don't know about things in history that happened. The heads are poetic. So Ted said it was like a tuning fork went off and all the writers got that same pitch because the tone of these stories all have that, like they're brilliant, they're succinct, they are kind of storytelling and poetic at the same time, and everyone just got it, you know? And it was really fun for me, who edits a lot of these people's writing, to see them work in that 250 word or so word length. And each story was assigned to someone who was particularly interested in this topic.
Trish, you cast the writers for each piece so well because you know the writers and you know what they're into. And what I love is Variety is nothing if not authoritative. And these pieces are all, once you read these 250 ish words, you really know something about that subject. We've been planning this 120th anniversary issue for a long time, but as the way of these things, journalism can be a very unpredictable business. And despite our best laid plans, we had to scramble because Netflix and Warner Brothers and HBO and Paramount decided to go at it over the sale process. And so the week that we had planned to have our anniversary issue, there was a huge, pretty much an earthquake in Hollywood. And we knew that we could not be so tone deaf as to ignore that. So back to Haley Kluge came up with the idea of doing a double cover. So our front cover was devoted to the news of the moment. Netflix, HBO, Warner Brothers, David Ellison trying to crash the party, a good old stew of what's going on. But then you flip it over, and on the back page, there is our beautiful 120th cover that everybody worked so hard on. It killed us to think that, oh my gosh, we're going to have to not put this on the cover after working so hard. But we came up with the solution. When this was published on Wednesday, when we pulled these out of the boxes, I walked around the office hugging this issue because I love it so much, because I feel like it encapsulates the best of what Variety is. We're telling you about what's coming. We are helping people interpret incredibly disruptive times, including the consolidation that is utterly changing the face of Hollywood. But we also can look back and help people interpret the past with great authority and incredible writing.
I also felt like I fell in love with my colleagues, I have to say, through this piece. I really did. It was such a labor of love for them to write these pieces. I was cracking a whip and calling them constantly and asking them for the work, and it was really hard. And the writers worked really so hard on this. I can't believe what talent we have on this staff. And somehow putting it all together, because I think there were 13 or 14 writers, including you, Cynthia, who did pretty much all our business blurbs in this piece, and it is carries such weight.
Another thing that makes me absolutely swoon is we have a page devoted to Variety's beloved slanguage,
Yeah.
the zany and zingy terminology that we used for years and years, and we still do. We sprinkle it in, although less in the internet age. And there were a lot of words that have gone into the lexicon, like soap opera, like sitcom, like DJ as a synonym for disc jockey, many others that we invented in our pages because, especially in the 30s, 40s, 50s, there were no rules. We did what we wanted. We made up words. We made up nicknames for studios. We made up nicknames for countries like the French. The French were the Gauls. The Germans were the Teutons, and just crazy stuff. When I plugged in the mid 90s, the paper was thick with those words. Again, in the internet era when not everybody was behind the velvet rope and understood it, we kind of had to ease up, but it still exists. I never want it to be like a dead language. We have a full page of our slanguage terms, and one of our terrific designers, Elisa Gao, came up with some great illustrations to bring some levity and some visuals that really do help define the words, especially for the uninitiated. And those illustrations just add that extra little pop, and it is fantastic. Okay, my last question for you, too. After spending so much time looking back in the past, is there an era or a time or a year that you, if you could, time travel? Is there an era or a moment or a personality that you'd like to meet after steeping yourselves in history? I will volunteer. I would love to go back to New York of 1905. I would love to see New York in that era. I would love to go to a vaudeville theater.
I didn't realize that Hollywood moved from New York to Los Angeles. You told me because the weather was better, which I thought was fascinating.
More sunlight, more ability.
Yes,
Film.
exactly. I would like to go. I would like to be around to have watched that transition. I think that's really fascinating.
It's a bit of a funny answer, but it was there was again that process of discovery we talked about. That originally we thought the closer to quote unquote now we got, the less space we devote to the decades. And you'd say, okay, we'll give more space to this 1970s because so much happened then. But then you look at the 1980s and it's just crazy town. I mean, it's everything from like Michael Jackson's Thriller to Sex, Lies, and Videotape to everything in between in that decade. And it's true with the 90s as well. But I found myself going like, wow, the 80s were bananas. Just to kind of go and be in that moment, like fresh. I can't imagine what it'd be like. And that's my
Once
kind of
again.
classical photo memory is of course like Michael Jackson 3 weeks after Thriller hit #1 at a Dreamgirls opening party in Culver City with none other than Liberace. It's fantastic.
Yes, I remember you came rushing out and saying, like, "This photo, this is it. I have found it. This is the 80s." Michael Jackson and Liberace. Oh my God. Thank you both so much for the pure joy of this issue.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Cynthia.
you.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. My colleague Chris Willman will be sitting down with Lady Gaga on Thursday night at the Grammy Museum in downtown LA. The Grammy Museum is hosting a screening of Gaga's latest concert tour movie, Lady Gaga in Harlequin Live, one night only. Can't wait to hear from Chris how it goes. We love to hear from our listeners, so please send thoughts, gripes, and other feedback about Daily Variety and other Variety podcasts to podcasts@variety.com. Before we go, congrats to Jeff Sosno. He's been promoted to president of Reprise Records, and he'll also continue in his role as executive vice president of A&R for Warner Records. Sosno first joined the Warner Brothers Group in 2012. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Trish Deitch and Ted Keller. Sticks, Nicks, Hick Picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety. And don't forget to tell us what you think at podcasts@variety.com. Thanks.